President Donald Trump had expected the day to go smoothly. The cameras were in place, the chairs aligned in perfect symmetry inside the Roosevelt Room, and the air was thick with the usual performance of bipartisan cooperation. Staffers moved with quiet precision. The press, kept at bay behind velvet ropes, murmured with bored anticipation. No one expected the meeting to become a turning point, not the aides, not the senators, and certainly not the president himself. But Jasmine Crockett did not fly in from Dallas to play along. She came with intention, a leather folder tucked beneath her arm, and the kind of spine you don't fabricate. The roundtable was billed as a discussion on education reform, teacher shortages, infrastructure modernization, funding equity, all packaged as a symbolic act of unity. The White House wanted good optics, quotable lines, and a day without controversy. The usual crowd was present. Senators from Ohio and Florida, a representative from Kansas, and a sharply dressed Secretary of Education who looked camera-ready. And at the center, flanked by his advisors and notes, was Trump, firmly into his second term and eager to control the narrative. Jasmine took a seat toward the far end of the table. She wasn't loud, but she wasn't quiet either. She greeted a Republican colleague from Arizona with a nod and a soft, "Good morning," then opened her folder. Inside were datasets, handwritten letters from teachers, and bullet points that smelled of reality more than spin. No theatrics, no dramatics. Just facts and frustration from her community. As the opening remarks were given, Trump launched into familiar talking points, record funding, school choice, and complaints about red tape. His tone was sharp, rehearsed, and laced with a defensive edge, as if daring someone to challenge him. Jasmine didn't interrupt. She listened as others took their turns, some praising, others tiptoeing around dissent. But when her time came, she didn't ask permission. "Mr. President," she began, voice even, "I represent a district where some schools can't afford air conditioning, where teachers buy supplies with their own money because the schools don't have what they need." There was a slight pause, not dramatic, just long enough to pull the eyes of a few aides from their notepads. "And we keep hearing about school choice, like it's the golden answer. But if we don't fund public schools equitably, we're just setting communities up to fail." She kept her tone respectful, but steady. Her words carried weight, shaped by the rhythm of a trial lawyer presenting a case. She even read from a fifth-grade teacher's letter, the ink still visible in shaky blue handwriting. The teacher had bought chairs for her class, using her own paycheck. Trump shifted in his seat, looking from his right, then back toward her. "Are you finished?" he asked, trying to mask irritation. "I'll wrap up in 10 seconds, Jasmine replied, unfazed. "But I do think it's fair to ask, why is it still this bad? And when do we stop pretending it's working?" A silence fell over the room. It wasn't hostile. It was the kind of silence that made people check whether they were still breathing. The Secretary of Education cleared her throat. A senator near the corner fidgeted. Jasmine sat back, calm, hands folded. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't insulted anyone. She had simply asked the question thousands back home had been screaming into the void for years. But Trump didn't answer her. Instead, he leaned toward an aide and whispered something too low to catch. Seconds later, 2 security guards stepped through the side entrance, quiet but unmistakable. That's when everyone in the room realized what was about to happen. Trump wasn't going to argue. He was going to remove her. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't move at all. She glanced at the guards, then back at Trump, as if she still had one more sentence to say. One of the guards, younger, with a shaved head and a subtle White House pin, hesitated. He wasn't sure if he was escorting or observing. He looked for a signal, either from Trump or from Jasmine. Trump tapped his index finger on the table twice. A subtle but clear instruction. The guard leaned in slightly and spoke in a low tone. "Congresswoman, we're going to need you to." But Jasmine raised her hand gently. Not to stop him. To speak first. "I'm fine," she said softly, like she was calming him, not resisting. "I'm just asking a question." Chairs creaked. Papers shuffled. The room sensed something bigger than protocol was about to unravel. Then came an unexpected voice. Senator Howard Geller from Wisconsin, a Republican more known for his love of golf than policy depth, leaned in. "She didn't threaten anyone, did she?" Heads turned. Trump glared. Geller shrugged slightly. Thought this was supposed to be a round table. Aren't we here to talk? Trump didn't respond, but the moment shifted. Jasmine turned slightly, so her voice would carry. I wasn't attacking you, Mr. President. I'm representing families whose schools haven't seen fresh paint since the 90s. That's not disruption. That's duty. The guard shifted, looked back at his supervisor. He didn't want this. And Jasmine wasn't giving him a reason. Another voice, Representative Melissa Darnell of Utah, added, She's making a point we all know is real. Maybe uncomfortable, but real. And then Jasmine stood, not in protest, but with composure. If asking about equity in public schools makes you uncomfortable, she said, maybe that's the conversation we need most. Her voice didn't crack. Her back remained straight. For the first time, cameras shifted focus from Trump to her. Trump tapped his finger again, but the guards didn't move. Whether unsure or unwilling, they froze. Jasmine, seeing the moment for what it was, nodded slightly. I'll excuse myself, she said, but I won't apologize for speaking truth in a room that claims to care about kids. She picked up her folder, slid in her chair, and walked out, not fast, not slow, just measured. On her way out, a young aide barely in her 20s met her eyes. There was no pity there, just understanding. The door closed behind her, and silence filled the room once again. Trump, eyes fixed on the chair she'd vacated, finally spoke. We can move on. But the truth? Nothing about that room would move on the way they planned, because by the time Jasmine stepped outside, her name was already being whispered across the country, and what began as a quiet question was about to become something much louder. Jasmine Crockett didn't storm out of the Roosevelt room. She didn't slam the door or shout anything over her shoulder. She simply walked, heels clicking steadily on the marble floor, folder tucked neatly beneath her arm, like someone who had just done exactly what she came to do. The moment the door closed behind her, the White House changed. Inside, the energy shifted. Outside, the internet ignited. By the time she reached the sidewalk, her phone buzzed 3 times in rapid succession. Then again, and again. She didn't even look at it yet. She just walked forward, her pace even, face calm, as a lone security officer trailed behind her. He didn't speak. He didn't touch her arm. In fact, it looked like he wasn't sure whether he was escorting her or simply witnessing history. Near the barricades, a small group of reporters waited. They hadn't been allowed inside the round table, but they could tell something had happened, something real. There was a tension in the air, like thunder had cracked behind closed doors. The guard didn't explain, and Jasmine didn't stop. She passed them like she'd walked that path 100 times, eyes straight ahead, unbothered. Back inside the room she had just left, Trump was visibly irritated. His body language had shifted. What had started as confident posturing now looked clipped and defensive. He fidgeted with his notes. When Representative Darnell tried to circle back to the topic of school lunch subsidies, he interrupted sharply. We're not here to talk about cafeteria food, he snapped, brushing off the suggestion like it was beneath him. Around the table, a few of his staffers exchanged nervous glances. An aide slid a phone across the table toward the president. The screen displayed a headline from a political blog already breaking the story. Trump removes Representative Jasmine Crockett from Education Roundtable after heated exchange. The moment had barely ended, and yet the world already knew. Trump read it silently, jaw tightening, not in rage, but in calculation. He hadn't planned this. The event was meant to be controlled, scripted, forgettable. But Jasmine Crockett hadn't followed the script. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't refused to leave. And somehow, that made it worse. In another wing of the White House, the communications team was already fielding press inquiries. Dozens of reporters wanted to know why a sitting congresswoman had been asked to leave a supposedly bipartisan event. A few asked more pointedly, had she been removed simply for asking about underfunded schools? Outside, Jasmine finally sat down on a stone bench just past the East Wing parking circle. She didn't check her notifications yet. She just breathed. The air was crisp, but she barely noticed. A Capitol Police officer passed by and gave her a nod, not one of authority, but quiet acknowledgement. Then she opened Twitter. In less than 30 minutes, The clip had already racked up over 200,000 views. It had been screen recorded from a C-SPAN livestream and reposted with the caption, "If asking about equity in public schools makes you uncomfortable, then maybe that's the conversation we need most." That was the line, the one that was now echoing across screens everywhere. The replies were overwhelming. A woman in Detroit posted a video from her car, eyes glossy with tears. "I've waited my whole life to hear someone say that to him," she said, barely above a whisper. Another clip showed a teacher in Arizona writing, "She said what we've all been thinking. That's leadership." Meanwhile, inside the Roosevelt room, Trump kept glancing toward the chair Jasmine had left behind. At one point, his voice dropped low. "She made it about race," he muttered. Not loud enough for microphones, but clearly audible to those around him. It was Senator Geller who finally responded. "No," he said firmly. "She made it about schools." The room fell silent again. Jasmine wasn't there anymore, but the echo of her question remained, haunting every corner. But she wasn't thinking about that now. She was on the phone with her mother. "Baby." Her mother's voice trembled slightly. "Did you just challenge the president on live TV?" Jasmine smiled softly. "I asked a question, Mama." "Well," her mom replied after a pause, "you asked the right one." By the time Jasmine reached her hotel in Foggy Bottom, the story had gone national. Every major cable news network was airing the footage. CNN called it a seismic moment. Fox News claimed she had disrespected the presidency. But the video didn't lie, and neither did the silence that followed her words. Inside her hotel room, she didn't turn on the lights. She just sank onto the bed, kicked off her heels, and let herself exhale. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Ava Gordon, her communications director. Jasmine answered with a tired voice. "I hope you're sitting down," Ava said immediately. "You're being called the voice of the year." "You mean the line that got me kicked out?" Jasmine asked with a half laugh. "Girl," Ava replied, "that line just put you on every TV in America." Jasmine didn't smile fully. Not yet. She knew viral moments fade. What mattered was whether the message would outlast the noise, whether people would stop pretending not to hear. At the White House press briefing, the press secretary faced a storm of questions. Why had Representative Crockett been removed? Was she disruptive, or just inconvenient? Was it about tone or content? The answers were vague, evasive. The round table was meant to be collaborative, the press secretary repeated, and disruptions were handled appropriately. No one believed it. That night, Jasmine appeared on MSNBC via Zoom. She wore a simple navy sweater. No makeup. Hair pulled back. The host, Nina Conway, welcomed her like an old friend. "Congresswoman Crockett," she began, "I want to thank you, not just for joining us, but for holding your ground." "Thank you, Nina," Jasmine replied calmly. "It wasn't planned. It was just honest." Conway leaned forward. "When you said, if asking about equity makes you uncomfortable, maybe that's the conversation we need most, did you know that would hit the way it did?" Jasmine shook her head. "I was just tired of pretending. There are kids in my district who eat lunch from vending machines, who sit in classrooms without heat. If asking about that is too much, then maybe the system's more broken than anyone wants to admit." The clip of the interview went viral all over again. In a church basement in Newark, public school parents projected it on a wall. In a community center break room in Albuquerque, a janitor paused mid-shift to listen. Even in a rural diner in Missouri, a waitress named Connie turned up the volume. When a customer mumbled something about another loud liberal, Connie didn't blink. She wasn't yelling, she said. She was telling the truth. The next morning, Jasmine was back in the air, heading home to Texas. A flight attendant recognized her. "You're the Congresswoman, right?" she asked. Jasmine nodded. "I saw the video," the attendant said. "My son goes to a Title I school. What you said, thank you." Jasmine smiled, small but sincere. "Tell him we're not done fighting." She leaned back in her seat, eyes closed, finally letting herself breathe. This wasn't over. Not even close. But something had changed. And deep down, she could feel it. Trump may have tried to silence her, but in doing so, he handed her a stage. and the voice that rose from it was one that couldn't be ignored. The plane touched down in Dallas just before sunset. Jasmine Crockett stepped out, not as the same woman who had flown out just 2 days before. Her district office was already surrounded, not by protesters or hecklers, but by a small crowd of reporters, teachers, and neighbors. They weren't angry. They weren't chaotic. They were just waiting to see what she'd say next. But Jasmine didn't go there straight away. She went home first, to her quiet apartment tucked above a bookstore in Oak Cliff, where the air didn't buzz with politics, where nobody asked for statements, and where the only sound came from the ceiling fan slowly circling. The moment she closed the door behind her, she dropped her bag to the floor and leaned against it, letting herself be still. Her phone kept buzzing, but she ignored it. No cable anchor or Twitter trending topic could offer her what she needed now, peace. She poured a glass of water, leaned on the kitchen counter, and stared out the window. Across the alley, neighborhood kids were playing basketball, their laughter bouncing through the air like nothing in the world had changed. For a moment, she wished she could join them, just be part of that innocence. Her mother called, just after the sky turned indigo. "You need to rest," she said, her voice warm but stern. "I saw you on the news again this morning. CNN ran your clip right after a segment on Wall Street." Jasmine gave a tired laugh. "Guess I'm more volatile than the stock market." Her mother didn't laugh. "I mean it. You're carrying a lot right now, baby. And I'm proud of you. But I also worry." Jasmine stared at the floor, her chest tightening with the weight of it all. "You and every cable host in America," she said with a weak smile. "No," her mother replied. "They care about ratings. I care about the little girl who used to recite speeches into her hairbrush. That one. That got her." Jasmine blinked hard and smiled. Not for the cameras, not for the public, just for herself. Later that night, as she checked her inbox, she scrolled through hundreds of messages. Most were notes of support from parents, educators, even high school students. But hidden in the pile were a few darker messages. Threats. Anonymous. Venomous. The kind of bile that women in public office, especially black women, know too well. She forwarded the worst to her security team and shut the laptop. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat there, breathing through the heaviness. The next morning, Brittany, her assistant, was waiting at the office door with wide eyes and a letter in hand. "You're going to want to read this," she said. It was handwritten, thick paper, blue ink. A retired Army colonel from Pennsylvania. Conservative. Lifelong Republican. Jasmine opened it slowly, unsure what to expect. "Congresswoman Crockett," it began. "I didn't vote for you, and I probably never will. But what you did in that room took more courage than I've seen from generals under fire. You didn't raise your voice. You raised a mirror, and whether we like what it shows or not, we have to look." Jasmine read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in her drawer. "People are listening," Brittany whispered. Jasmine nodded. "Now we figure out what to do with that." Outside, the street was quiet, but her voicemail wasn't. Her inbox wasn't. The floodgates had opened, and people weren't just talking. They were demanding more. A voicemail from Kansas City stood out. A woman older, maybe late 50s. Her voice wavered but stayed steady. "I'm a bus driver," she said. "Been working since I was 16. Never thought I'd see someone walk into that house and say what needed to be said, then walk out with her head still up. Don't stop. Please don't stop." That morning, Jasmine sat at her desk as a group of kids passed by on a school tour. One of them, a little boy with a backpack too big for him, looked up, pointed at the window and said, "That's where she works." He didn't know it, but he gave her more than any viral clip ever could, a reason to keep showing up. But for every moment of hope, there was also pushback brewing behind closed doors. In Washington, the media machine hadn't slowed. The clip of Jasmine calmly questioning Trump and his silent, then hostile reaction was now part of a wider national dialogue. News outlets ran primetime specials about school inequity. On PBS, her words were overlaid with images of broken desks, ceiling leaks, and exhausted teachers in overcrowded classrooms. She hadn't done more interviews since MSNBC. She didn't want the focus to be on her. She wanted the conversation to stay about the schools. But attention has its own gravity. On Capitol Hill, a CNN panel titled, "Who Gets to Ask the Hard Questions?" gathered educators, former students, and parents from across the country. It was no longer just about her. It had become a question about access, about voice, about why it still took so much courage just to talk about crumbling schools. The most unexpected moment came from Idaho. A video posted by a teenage girl in Coeur d'Alene showed her grandfather, a white Vietnam vet with a gray beard, sitting on his porch. "I don't agree with most Democrats," he said plainly. But that lady didn't yell. She didn't wave a sign. She just told the truth. And if the truth makes the president that uncomfortable, maybe he ain't doing his job. The video exploded, over 10 million views in less than a day. Anchors quoted him. Twitter reposted him. Signs at rallies printed his words. Even the political class began to shift. During a press conference, the House Minority Leader named Jasmine specifically. "She reminded us," he said, "what public service is supposed to look like." But not all reactions were public praise. At Mar-a-Lago, Trump's closest political operatives gathered to discuss strategy. Inside a private golf club conference room, they passed around a memo, bold bullet points that read, "Portray Representative Crockett as divisive, as uncooperative, as radical. Emphasize her lack of real solutions." They didn't want to admit it, but she had struck a nerve. And now, they wanted the narrative back. But outside that world, people were writing their own stories. A group of teachers in East St. Louis launched a grassroots campaign called #ClassroomsNotPolitics. Their first move? Flooding congressional voicemails with one-minute testimonies about the condition of their schools. A math teacher in rural Oklahoma said, "We have one working bathroom for over 200 kids." Representative Crockett asked the question. Now we need answers. And answers weren't coming from the usual places. Jasmine wasn't looking for a spotlight. She hadn't chased viral fame. But the truth she spoke, simple, pointed, and rooted in lived experience, had kicked open a door too long kept shut. Now, people weren't waiting for permission to care. They were writing letters, posting clips, holding forums in church basements and school gyms. The system had long depended on silence. Jasmine Crockett broke that silence with a single question. And no matter what came next, the country was no longer pretending not to hear. 2 days after Tulsa, Jasmine Crockett was back in Dallas. Her apartment, nestled above a quiet bookstore in Oak Cliff, was the closest thing she had to normal. As soon as she shut the door behind her, she sank to the floor. She didn't head to the couch, didn't check the headlines. She just let herself melt into the silence. After a whirlwind of interviews, school visits, and national attention, this was the first breath of calm she'd had in days. The media might have seen confidence, fire, and poise, but what they didn't see were the sleepless nights, the flood of messages, or the pressure building behind her eyes. With the blinds drawn and the city buzzing quietly outside, she stood up, grabbed a glass of water, and stared through the window. Across the street, kids were still playing basketball in the alleyway, laughing like the world hadn't shifted. She watched them, envy blooming in her chest, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't have to carry it all. That evening, her mother called again. Her voice came soft, but weighted with concern. "You need rest," she repeated, like a prayer. "CNN played your clip again this morning, right after the Dow Jones update." Jasmine gave a dry chuckle. "Guess I'm more unpredictable than Wall Street." But her mom didn't laugh. "I'm proud of you," she said, "but you've been carrying so much. Don't forget to take care of the little girl who used to rehearse speeches in front of her mirror." Jasmine smiled at that genuinely this time. Later that night, she scrolled through her overflowing inbox. Most of the messages were warm. Dozens came from teachers and students, many from people she'd never met. But hidden among the thanks and applause were darker things, anonymous threats, hateful rants, and racist venom typed in all caps. She'd seen this before. All women in politics had, especially black women. But that didn't make it easier. She quietly forwarded the worst messages to her security detail, then shut the laptop. No response needed. No energy to waste. The next morning, Brittany greeted her at the office with wide eyes and a paper in hand. "You've got to read this," she said, holding up a thick envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from a retired Army colonel in Pennsylvania, a white conservative, lifelong Republican. His words were deliberate, inked in blue, not typed. "Congresswoman Crockett," he wrote, "I didn't vote for you. I probably never will. But what you did in that room, that took more strength than I've seen from some of our own generals. You didn't shout. You didn't storm out. You held up a mirror, and we didn't like what we saw." Jasmine read it 3 times, slowly, then folded it and tucked it inside her desk drawer like something sacred. "People are listening," Brittany said softly. Jasmine nodded. "Now we figure out what to do with that." The buzz hadn't stopped. Her voicemail was still full. Her emails still overflowing. In one message, a bus driver from Kansas City left a late-night recording. "I've been working since I was 17, the woman said. Never seen someone walk into that building, speak truth, and walk out with her head still high. That did something to me. Don't stop." That same morning, she watched a class of elementary students pass by on a school field trip. One of the kids pointed to her office window and said, "That's where she works." It wasn't just an observation. It was a reminder. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was a responsibility. Meanwhile, across the nation, the media storm only intensified. The clip of her White House exchange was now more than a trending topic. Major outlets aired primetime specials on school inequity. One segment on PBS paired her quote, "If asking about equity makes you uncomfortable, maybe that's the conversation we need most," with footage of classrooms suffering from years of neglect, crumbling ceilings, broken heaters, overcrowded lunchrooms. She wasn't giving more interviews, not because she was hiding, but because she didn't want to become the story. The issue had always been bigger than her. On CNN, a panel aired titled, "Who Gets to Ask the Hard Questions?" Teachers, parents, and students filled the screen. It was no longer about Jasmine alone. It was about the system that had ignored them for decades. The clip from her speech had lit a fuse, and now the whole nation was holding the matchbox. Then came the video that no one saw coming. A teenage girl in Idaho posted a clip of her grandfather, a retired corrections officer, white beard, weathered face, sitting with his dog on a porch in Coeur d'Alene. "I don't agree with most Democrats," he said calmly. "But that lady, she didn't yell. She didn't point fingers. She just told the truth. And if that truth makes the president uncomfortable, maybe he's not doing his job." That one video hit over 10 million views in under 24 hours. Journalists quoted him. Protest signs bore his words. TV anchors replayed the clip with reverence. Even Capitol Hill began to shift. At a press conference, the House Minority Leader referenced Jasmine directly. She reminded us what public service is supposed to look like. But behind closed doors, praise turned to paranoia. At Mar-a-Lago, Trump's inner circle met in private. His team passed around a printed memo filled with spin tactics. One line stood out in bold. Frame Representative Crockett as divisive, radical, and lacking real solutions. They didn't want to admit they had underestimated her. They wanted the narrative back under control. But outside the Beltway, the people were creating their own stories. A group of teachers in East St. Louis launched a grassroots campaign. #ClassroomsNotPolitics. Their first move was simple but powerful. Flood Congress with 1-minute voicemails describing the realities of underfunded schools. One teacher from rural Oklahoma said, "We've got one working bathroom for 200 kids." Representative Crockett asked the right question. Now we want the right answer. Jasmine never claimed to have all the answers. She didn't walk into that White House roundtable to create a viral moment. But she asked a question that hit a nerve, and the country couldn't stop thinking about it. Parents were discussing school budgets at kitchen tables. Teens were posting TikToks about education reform. Teachers were opening up about their struggles, not just to be heard, but to be believed. The system wasn't built to respond to voices like hers. It was built to silence them. But that wasn't working anymore. Not with cell phone cameras. Not with social media. Not with a population that had seen too many patched ceilings and peeling floors to stay quiet. She had been labeled disruptive, called radical, accused of showboating. But Jasmine wasn't playing for headlines. She was playing for kids like Eli in Tulsa, who wrote her a note that simply read, "I didn't know people like you got to talk to the president." That note, written in pencil on notebook paper, meant more to her than a million likes. And as the attention grew, so did the stakes. She wasn't just the Congresswoman from Dallas anymore. She had become a symbol of resistance, of accountability, and of truth spoken plainly. But with every spotlight came a shadow, and Jasmine Crockett knew the storm was far from over. By the time Sunday came, what had started as a quiet interruption in a government roundtable had grown into a full-blown cultural reckoning. Jasmine Crockett didn't just spark debate. She ignited something that refused to burn out. Cable news networks ran her quote on a loop, pairing it with footage of decaying school buildings, rooms with no heat, bathrooms without doors, books that hadn't been replaced in decades. But Jasmine wasn't watching. She had deliberately taken a step back from the glare. Instead, she spent Sunday morning at a small church in South Dallas, surrounded by elders, educators, and neighborhood kids. It wasn't a media event. No cameras. Just real people, many of whom had walked to get there. When the pastor asked her to speak, she kept it brief. "This isn't about politics," she said, looking out at the worn faces that reminded her of her own childhood. "It's about what kind of future we're willing to fight for." That same day, on Capitol Hill, a different kind of meeting was happening. Tucked inside a quiet conference room, a group of GOP strategists convened behind closed doors. The goal: reshape the narrative. Jasmine had shaken something loose in the public consciousness, and they needed it buried. A printed memo was passed around. Among the talking points, paint her as divisive, accuse her of emotional manipulation, and, most importantly, discredit the message, not just the messenger. But there was a problem. The message wasn't coming only from her anymore. In small towns and inner cities, public school teachers began organizing on their own. The hashtag classrooms not politics started gaining momentum. Parents began uploading 1-minute video testimonials, classrooms with black mold, broken desks, missing textbooks. In each clip, someone would say, "This is what Representative Crockett was talking about." One teacher from Nebraska recorded herself standing in a gym with cracked walls and no working lights. "We're not asking for luxury. We're asking for dignity," she said. Meanwhile, Jasmine's office was overrun. Brittany, her assistant, now had a dedicated team just to handle mail and phone calls. Constituents and strangers alike kept reaching out. Some were offering support. Others shared their stories. One voicemail came from a student in rural West Virginia. "We don't have internet at our school. I do homework in the parking lot of a McDonald's." Jasmine listened to that one twice. She forwarded it to her education policy staff. "Give me a call with him," she said. The press didn't stop either. Panel shows began to look different. Instead of talking heads arguing about policy, networks began inviting teachers, cafeteria workers, and bus drivers. MSNBC did a special report titled Voices from the Classroom, where they played Jasmine's quote right before cutting to students giving tours of their underfunded schools. What made it powerful wasn't just the footage. It was how eerily familiar it all felt. No region, no party, no demographic could claim innocence in how public education had been neglected. Even late-night comedians picked it up. Julian Ray, on his top-rated show, played the viral clip again and then looked into the camera with a serious face. When asking why schools are falling apart gets you kicked out of a meeting, maybe the problem isn't the person asking. The audience, used to laughter, fell silent. It was one of those rare moments where entertainment paused for reflection. And then came the pushback. Far-right radio hosts began spinning the story as a political stunt. One segment accused Jasmine of performative outrage, while another implied that she was racializing an otherwise polite conversation. A few went so far as to suggest she had planned the entire moment. But those arguments struggled to hold water, especially because the footage told a different story. No shouting, no drama, just a calm, steady voice asking a question no one else dared to. Still, the attacks got nastier. Jasmine's staff intercepted emails, filled with slurs. Online trolls posted doctored images. Conspiracy blogs ran stories, claiming she had ties to radical groups. It was textbook deflection, loud noise to drown out a quiet truth. But Jasmine didn't respond. Not directly. She let the work speak for itself. On Wednesday, she met with a bipartisan group of lawmakers behind closed doors. No press, no spectacle. Just conversations. Some of those in the room had remained silent during the original incident. Now they were asking how to help. One Republican from Ohio admitted he hadn't fully understood the scope of the problem until his own constituents began reaching out. "They sent me pictures," he said, eyes lowered. "I didn't know it was this bad." Back in her district, Jasmine kept showing up. At food banks, at PTA meetings, at a career day at a local elementary school, where she read from a children's book and answered questions from third graders. "Did you really talk to the president?" one boy asked, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief. Jasmine smiled. "I did, and so can you one day." But while the public reaction grew louder, some in Washington started moving in the opposite direction, toward silence. Some of her colleagues began declining interview requests. Others, who had privately praised her, chose not to go on record. Jasmine noticed. "They want the moment," she told Brittany, "but they don't want the responsibility." Still, the movement kept growing. Teachers in over 30 states signed a petition calling for a national hearing on public school conditions. A school board in Arizona passed a resolution quoting her exact words from the White House. "If asking about equity makes you uncomfortable, maybe that's the conversation we need most." It was now etched into public record. Even Hollywood noticed. A major streaming platform reached out about adapting the incident into a documentary. Jasmine declined. "This isn't a movie," she told her team. "It's real life." But nothing prepared her for the letter that came on Friday. It was handwritten again. No return address. But this one was different. Inside was a photo, an old, faded black and white snapshot of a classroom from the 1950s. Black students sitting in rows, broken chalkboard behind them. No heating, no books. And beneath it, written in tight cursive, "Same fight, new voice. Don't let them bury it again." Jasmine stared at the photo for a long time, not because it surprised her, but because it reminded her. What she had said that day in the White House wasn't just a moment. It was a continuation of a struggle that stretched back generations. The tools were different. The buildings looked newer. But the gaps, the silence, the excuses, they were all the same. By week's end, some headlines had begun to fade. The news cycle churned on. But in living rooms, staff rooms, and school hallways, the conversation had changed. Students were asking questions. Parents were demanding answers. Teachers were no longer whispering about shortages. They were shouting. And Jasmine, she kept showing up. Tired but steady. Attacked but unmoved. Because once you ask a question loud enough, in the right room, you can't unhear it. And neither can the country.